Defining what is sleep um, it takes a little bit of
Alert from
consideration of a
calendar.
number of phenomena.
The
There is
miracle.
a set of a phenomena that has been preserved across many species and is formed the basis for what we call sleep. And one key element of that is decreased responsiveness, um, where that is easily reversible state of decreased responsiveness to the environment in a species-specific posture. Different animals sleep in different positions based on their biology and their nature. For example, marine mammals actually sleep one side of their brain at a time, so that they can swim with the other side of their brain, and so they can come up to the surface to breathe. A key factor is that it has to be differentiated from coma, hibernation, and anesthesia, and that is some of the things we've already discussed create that differentiation. But another factor is that it's cyclical, and that it's states of quiescence that recur with regular endogenous cyclicity that isn't dependent on temperature or availability of food and water as occurs with hibernation. And in mammals and in birds, there are a set of phenomena that occur during sleep that are referred to as sleep stages. And these stages are arbitrarily defined to a large degree by trying to break up into a systematic way the complex set of phenomena we observe when we measure brain electrical activity and a wide range of other kinds of physiology simultaneously while in humans and other animals. And we define states of wake. N1 used to be called stage 1, N2, which used to be called stage 2, N3 used to be called, and stage 3 or so wave sleep and REM. And the predominant stage in the night is N2, and non-REM overall dominates the night. Now, people often think of these stages as progressing in an orderly way. They don't. They jump around quite a bit during the night. And it's also not as simple and clean a phenomenon as people often assume. The night is broken up into 30-second chunks for scoring purposes, and the state that defines the greater than 50% of each 30-second chunk is what is assigned to that state, that 30-second chunk. So you can have like 15 and a half seconds of N2 characteristics, and then just under 15 seconds of wake, and we call it N2. There's a lot of theories about why we sleep, and remarkably, even though we spend a third of our time doing it, we don't really understand why. And I'm just going to review briefly some of the leading theories. One is that it has something to do with maintaining synaptic plasticity and creating synaptic plasticity. So the primary observation there is that a period of non-REM sleep after people are exposed to information and prior to testing enhances performance. So somehow the consolidation of the information is facilitated by sleep. And then there's the homeostatic model that is over the course of the day, our brains all are changed. Learning is achieved by increasing and decreasing the strength of connections between neurons. You've probably heard the terms long-term potentiation, long-term depression. These are fundamental phenomena of brain physiology. And all day long, these connection strengths are being increased and decreased. And the theory is that eventually, at some point, you can saturate that if something isn't done to reset you into a range where you can further increase and decrease again. You can get where all the range of change is taken up, and then we wouldn't be able to learn new things. So the idea is that during sleep, there's a resetting of these synaptic connection strengths, but there's retaining of the strongly reinforced signals that allow us to maintain and improve our signal-to-noise ratio of
Alert from mail.
learned information.
LinkedIn
Another
security.
big theory is cellular energy demand.
Alert
And
from
key
mail.
observations in that
Investing
form
insights
the basis of
daily.
that theory is that while the longer we're awake, the longer we deplete ATP, the primary energy source in the brain, and those high phosphate bonds, we deplete those phosphate bonds from ATP in cells in the brain, and increasingly run that battery down, if you will, while we're awake. And then and that's primarily reflected in a buildup of adenosine-related modulators. And interestingly, during sleep, the adenosine is decreased, and that is it replenishes that supply, and that process seems to have a key mediator of adenosine. Adenosine, if injected into the region just in front of the hypothalamus in a wide range of animals, has been shown to reliably and immediately induce non-REM sleep. And interestingly, we do the experiments around the importance of adenosine every day by drinking coffee and tea and other things, and because caffeine mediates its effect by blocking adenosine receptors. That's how it keeps us awake. So these are some of the main theories about why we sleep. Now, a critical question is, how much sleep do we need? And how much sleep does any individual need? People are probably familiar with seeing graphs of this sort that show the distribution of sleep, actual sleep in the population. And it's very common to misunderstand the average in the population, which is 7.5 to 8 hours. People misconstrue that as the need for sleep, but it is just the average. And interestingly, there are a set of people that's not small in number who form the tails of this distribution in both directions. And just in terms of sleep need, the question we're usually addressing is about people who are getting less than 7 hours of sleep. Who are these people? So some are clearly people with sleep disorders who would like to be able to sleep more but can't. Some are people maybe who think that they should get more sleep than they need, and are actually needing less than 7 hours, 8 hours of sleep. And for those people, the guidelines that have been published are do them a disservice, because they come to believe something terrible is going to happen if they don't sleep their 7 hours, and everybody else tells them the same thing. Now, are there short sleepers? I'm just saying this so people understand that when they see a patient, how should they assess how much sleep they should be getting? Well, the reality is we don't have a perfect way or even a great way to figure out how much sleep an individual needs. We just are at a state where the best we can do at this point in history is ask, how much sleep do you need to feel and function well? That's what I do in clinical practice when I ask patients about this, try to determine this. Now, it's very clear that sleep deprivation has negative consequences for health. This has been shown in many, 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 many studies. And but these generally look at population kinds of effects. That is, they don't address the possibility that there might be individuals for whom depriving or giving them a certain amount of sleep. Some people will not show impairment. There's individual differences that have been reliably identified. Sleep deprivation experiments and observations of naturalistic sleep, and there's differences among people are stable over time. Some people do fine with 6 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep repeatedly, and other people do not. And relatively recently, there's been a development that suggests that there's probably some people who don't need as much sleep. Our group has found that there's 3 different genes that are autosomal dominant single gene mutations that confer the need for less sleep than everybody else. These are people who sleep 4 to 6.5 hours a night. They have no complaints. They're functioning well. They don't have mania. They don't have any adverse consequences that have been found in any way that we've been able to assess it. So there does seem to be the possibility of some group having less sleep. And I would just encourage people to take this into account when they think about how much sleep does any individual need. There may be in front of you a person who needs 5 hours a night, and that's it. A critical aspect of sleep-wake function is that it interacts with the circadian circa. DN means about a day length. Our human cycle is just a little bit over 24 hours.
Alert from mail.
And the fact that it's just over
MJR
24 hours
theaters.
doesn't cause problems, because
Alert from mail.
light and the environment
Piloturn.
and a number of other cues are important, but light is the most important one. Keeps our bodies on track. Now, the circadian rhythm is a system that organizes in a way that aligns the activities of essentially every cell in the body, and including all of our organs. So that, for example, you only create the digestive juices at the time when you tend to eat. Doing it in the middle of the night is counterproductive. But as a result, eating in the middle of the night is counterproductive because your body's not prepared for digestion at that time. There are best times to do everything. And that's something we understand through circadian rhythm. And one of those things is sleep. Sleep happens at a specific time of day in every animal. Essentially, it's programmed in because we have a clock. And that clock lives in a part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is in the hypothalamus. And it basically functions by driving wake promotion, keeping us awake at certain times of the day so that we cannot sleep, and allowing us to have consolidated periods of wakefulness that are extended so that we can do things like attend this talk. So I'm now going to shift to talking about some basic mechanisms of physiology of sleep and arousal. So over the course of the day, the longer we're awake, it's clear that we get a buildup in something in how much sleepiness we have and how much our capacity to sleep. After a full night's sleep, if you try to sleep, you find you can't. You're fully rested. But but as longer we're awake, this phenomenon, and we call it the buildup of sleep pressure. And it appears to be mediated by the adenosine in the basal forebrain that I talked about earlier. The longer you're awake, the more ATP you use up, and you free up and you pull off the phosphate bonds from adenosine triphosphate. Then you get free adenosine, and that makes us sleepier the longer we're awake. And that pressure for sleep and the adenosine is addressed by sleep. That pressure goes away, hopefully, at the end of a night of sleep, as I mentioned. But the circadian system interacts with that homeostatic system. And while the wakefulness, while the longer you're awake and homeostatic sleep drive is building up, so is wake drive to compensate for it, driven by the clock. The suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus turns on neuron activity that promotes wakefulness to counteract that pressure so we can stay awake and do things. And then when it comes to be your biological bedtime, it shuts down and allows you to go to sleep. And so this is sort of how sleep-wake function emerges through two main factors: a homeostatic one that is such that you get more sleepy the longer you're awake, and a circadian one that's driven by the clock and it makes you awake, allows you to be awake for extended periods of time during a biologically different day. Now, when these are misaligned, problems happen. That is, but when they're aligned up, it works well. You're awake and energetic during your wake time, and you sleep during your sleep periods, and that works well. But what happens if, and you can see that you tend to fall asleep at the peak of homeostatic sleep drive, at the point when the circadian wakefulness drive drops off. That's when you fall asleep, and you wake up once you've replenished, you've dropped your homeostatic sleep drive, but then your wake promoting activities or systems are kicked online by the clock, and that's the time that we wake. But when these things are not aligned, problems happen. So if you have jet lag, you move from here to wherever you are to 6 hours or 12 hours time zone shift, and you try to function, you have problems. Or if you try to do shift work and work during the day, because what happens in these situations is you'll find that the homeostatic sleep drive is high at the time you're trying to work, and you're sleepy and it's hard to function. Or you'll find that the clock is sending strong wake signals. If you're like a shift worker and you're trying to sleep during the day, the clock is sending wake signals because this is your biological day, and it's preventing you from sleeping, even though you've got a lot of homeostatic sleep drive built up and sleep pressure. So when these two processes aren't aligned, things don't work so well. And so that is a fundamental way that we understand some critical sleep disorders. There are two main, well, it's not two, there are a number of different neuronal systems that are critical in maintaining wakefulness and in different settings. So one of them is the orexin neurons, also referred to as hypocretin orexin neurons. This is a peptide that was discovered not too long ago by two different groups. One gave the name hypocretin, the other orexin. So we're going to refer to it as orexin from now on, just for simplicity's sake. But the orexin neurons are the neurons the clock uses to keep us awake during the day. But it's also driven by some other activities that help keep us awake. And the monoaminergic neurons, monoamines, also mediate some wakefulness in a number of situations. So one of those situations is on the positive side, when there's novelty or people are interested or excited about something, that these neurons will promote wakefulness. So just imagine getting excited about some question you're looking up on the web, and you're pursuing it, and we have the capacity to stay awake when we get interested in something or something is important. Or there's lots of positive reinforcing activities that can drive wakefulness. But on the other side of it, stress and anxiety can also keep us awake. And the sympathetic nervous system has a golden road to wakefulness for good reason. Let's suppose you're walking, through in a field, and suddenly a wolf comes and attacks you. Well, you don't just go to sleep because it's your bedtime. It's 10 p.m. Oh, I go to sleep now. This is my circadian bedtime. I'm just going to lie down and go to sleep. You would die, right? And historically, that was probably, that kind of thing was very important. You'd be attacked by, warring party or animal or predator or something. And so the sympathetic nervous system can override the normal sleep-wake systems, and is another component to this story. And that happens in a variety of situations. And that's mediated through monoaminergic neurons and these orexin neurons. And so just to look at the anatomy a little bit of the monoamines, this includes norepinephrine that is released by the locus coeruleus, and where you see Na figure. 5-HT is serotonin that comes from the raphe nuclei in the brainstem, as you can see on the figure. Dopamine is another key monoamine, similarly derived from the brainstem, and histamine from the tuberomammary nucleus, and acetylcholine make up sort of the set of monoamines. Now, and there's also orexin, which you can see depicted here from the lateral hypothalamus, that is the primary driver of wakefulness from the clock and mediates a number of the wakefulness in a number of situations that the monoamines may be activated. Now, on the other side of it, we have GABA driven by release, which is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, which can broadly shut down activity. And it is driven a lot by adenosine. The more adenosine builds up, the more activity in GABAergic inhibitory neurons is elicited. That seems to facilitate the transition to non-REM sleep, as we described earlier. Now, REM sleep is a unique state, and it has unique features like temperature regulation ceases, and sexual arousal occurs starting in utero every night, and during sleep there's also dreams happen, and other remarkable phenomena that are unique to this state. And just mechanistically, pons part of the brain is a critical feature for or critical aspect of physiology in REM sleep. And there's been a string of experiments that have shown that the pons is necessary for REM sleep. And there's also neurons in the hypothalamus, midbrain, and medulla otherwise that play a role. So now I'm going to shift to talking about pathophysiology of insomnia for a little bit. We don't really understand the ultimate pathophysiology of insomnia, but we have a set of observations that suggest that insomnia is associated with hyperarousal for 24 hours of the day, all the time. It's not just, insomnia is not just a problem of sleep, and it is defined as hyperarousal by a series of observations that led to this model. One is that if we look at brain activity while we're asleep, there's elevated fast EEG frequencies suggesting an activation of the arousal system. And then there's it takes longer for insomnia patients to fall asleep during the day. That people with insomnia have shorter sleep at night. Their brain metabolism is increased during sleep. They have elevated activity of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Their heart rate is increased. Their body temperature is increased, and there's altered heart rate variability. And these are the hallmarks of that observation. And interestingly, you can't create this in somebody just by giving them a sleep schedule of people with insomnia that was tried. It doesn't occur. It's the other way around. Now, just quickly to review the consequences of poor sleep. Sleep deprivation experiments have been widely carried out, both in rodents and humans, and in other animals. And in rodents, people have been able to eliminate sleep for long periods of time, and death ensues in about a month. And it occurs in association with a precipitous drop in temperature and body weight, despite increasing food intake, and that's thought to be a part of it. There's also some evidence of alterations in the immune system that may play a role. But in humans, it's primarily been sleep deprivation of a limited degree. We can't sleep deprive humans for a month. It's just not ethical or feasible to do. But similar kinds of phenomena have been observed, that there's huge impairments in people when you sleep deprive them. What we see as a consequence of both disturbed sleep and sleep deprivation is an increase in accidents, including work injuries and automobile accidents, that insomnia is a strong predictor of future depression and other mental health problems, substance abuse among them. And hypertension is associated with insomnia, along with metabolic syndrome, particularly among those who are short sleepers based on the polysomnogram. But it's not that automatically people who have insomnia get this. This is a correlative finding as all of you got. And then there's evidence that insomnia patients have some impairment in their ability to have sustained attention. And when you sleep deprive people, the deficits in cognition are much more apparent. That is, it's easy to show with a modest amount of sleep deprivation impairments on simple things like attention and reaction time, a variety of tasks. Now, there is some evidence accumulating that slow wave sleep disruption may increase markers that might predispose people to neurodegenerative conditions like buildup of amyloid and tau. And the relationship of that to pathophysiology of neurodegenerative conditions is unclear, but it does seem to be, there's some suggestive findings that might be linked. And then it's very clear that people who have problems with sleep deprivation or insomnia have impaired work performance, and this has been demonstrated across a wide variety of studies. So I want to stop there and just quickly summarize, and then we'll go to questions. It's clear we don't understand why we sleep, despite spending a third of our time doing it. This remains one of the great mysteries of human and animal existence. But we have increasing understanding of the pathophysiology of sleep problems, and an understanding of basic sleep-wake mechanisms. And it's clear in looking at this that sleep is vital to many of our important functions. I think another important takeaway point should be that sleep need varies among people. But if any individual doesn't get their sleep need, then you see all of these detrimental effects accumulating with impairments arising. And it's critical to think in those terms. Like if you see a person and they have getting 8 hours of sleep, that could be a person who needs 9 and they could be impaired. Or you might see somebody with getting 5 hours of sleep and they only need 5 and not impaired. So there's no number on its own which defines whether a person is likely to have impairment. It depends on the individual. So I'm going to stop there and move to looking at some questions. So first question is, does taking melatonin and other sleep medications interfere with normal sleeping pattern? Melatonin's primary effect is on the clock. It shifts the timing of the phase of the clock, and it can make all of your body processes, including sleep, occur at different times depending on when you take it. That's its biggest effect. And otherwise, it doesn't seem to have significant effects on sleep. And other sleep medications have modest effects on things like amount of REM sleep or slow wave sleep, but not in any way that seems to have any clinical significance. Their primary effect is that they make people fall asleep faster or stay asleep better in the middle of the night. And people who get benefit from these or who take them, many people say, I feel better and sleep better and function better, and they don't say, well, I feel and function better, but there's something wrong with my sleep. This medication has done something funny to it. You might hear that rarely, but by and large, it doesn't seem to be any kind of adverse effect. Another question is, the long COVID patients are reporting vivid nightmares and dreams. Is this related to the inflammation of the illness or something else? This is a really interesting question. I see people with long COVID in clinic who have insomnia, and I see some who are sleepy. Nobody knows at this point. There are some research studies that are getting launched to try and understand the relationship between sleep and COVID, but as of this moment, we do not have an understanding. Another question is, do anti-seizure medications affect sleep? Well, by and large, they do, and they tend to be sleep enhancing, but not reliable. But not all in the same way. And seizure medications vary in their mechanism. There's a number of different types of seizure medications. From, let's say, people might use phenytoin or carbamazepine or pregabalin. These are all different medications, and they have different effects. By and large, they tend to be sleep enhancing. So a question is, how does lack of sleep play a role in obesity? And I think the relationship between sleep and weight and sleep and potentially obesity is based on correlations. So we get large populations of people, and we see that people who sleep less tend to have greater weight or greater rate of obesity. We also can do individual level experiments in the laboratory and do things like disrupt slow wave sleep and see that this leads to an increase in appetite, interest, hunger. But that doesn't show that it actually plays a role. These are correlative. The individual night effects seem to be causative, but the problem there is they're brief. It's not clear what happens. Is a really important clinical factor over time. So I'd say that the answer is still yet to be fully determined to that question, but it's an important one to look at. And the same is true of another question that was raised about, is it proven that the lack of sleep can lead to dementia Alzheimer's? We have the same kinds of observations. There's correlations, and then there's some in-lab stuff that shows that if you take animals and you deprive them of sleep, they get buildup of things like beta amyloid, tau increase. Looks like through the failure, lack of clearance of these peptides from brain and cerebrospinal fluid, and but again, that doesn't mean that it causes the problem in people. I talk about this. I do some research in this area, and I talk about it with people who spend all their life thinking about neurodegenerative conditions, and they say it may be that you see that it plays a role in people who are prone, but it's unlikely that people who sleep deprive themselves, who are not prone, they don't have the genetic background predisposing them to the condition to develop these. But again, the jury is still out, and deliberations probably will take quite a while before we get an answer. Another question is sleeping 6 hours and intervals between night and day as effective as sleeping 6 hours straight through the night? This is an interesting question, and I would say that among people with insomnia, breaking your sleep into the day and night is bad. And like you asked the question, is napping good or bad? Well, napping is bad if you have insomnia because it takes away from what you can sleep at night. But in other people, it seems to be good, especially in older adults. It helps cognition. So I think there's not one answer to that, and it's a little bit complicated. But it could be good in people in general. So we'll have to stop there with questions. I really appreciate the great questions that you raised. I want to thank you for participating today. Thank you very much for attending, and